we are back for another breakdown of FX on Hulu's Devs. This is episode 7, the penultimate episode, so if you have not caught up to the show since then, go back, watch everything. We're going to be getting into some major spoilers here, and as always, if you like what we do, please be sure to subscribe to GameSpot Universe for more stuff about the stuff you love.
Meg, the intros to the show, like the opening montages for each episode, have become one of my favorite parts of the show as a whole. I feel like it'll be really interesting once it's all out to go back and kind of look at the beginning and the end of each episode. This one is kind of two different things mashed up together. We're getting the cavemen shots. We're getting these supernatural landscape shots. It made me think of Forrest's conversation with Katie later where he's saying nothing changed for 5,000 years. You know, rewatching it, I saw these natural shots as like, this is how the world was and this is the history that he's looking at. And then the other part is this repeating audio loop from this 1966 art piece by an artist named Steve Reich called Come Out. It relates to the Harlem Six, which was a 1960s controversy in New York, and this is the loop is from the testimony of one of the Harlem Six describing his injuries from like police beatings while they were in custody. And there's so much to unpack about why this is used here.
Yeah. This song, it's sampling this one line of dialogue, but then it cuts the dialogue into just one little phrase, and it's two different tracks layered on top of each other. And so the song continues to go, and like it starts out totally in sync, and then as it progresses, they do this thing called phase shifting, where they get like so out of sync that it just starts to sound like noise, which I thought like thematically talking about the show that's kind of the multi-worlds theory, right? Like it's two things that start at like a common point and then diverge off from one another. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're different, but they kind of are different just in the inherent, like in their inherent interpretation, they're different.
It relates to history, obviously, and the people within Devs, including Forrest and Katie and Stuart and Lyndon and everybody else, have been looking at various points throughout history, so it's likely that one of them has viewed this incident at some point, and so it fits with the show. But then also it made me think of the branching timelines, how these things are, it's the same thing but it's moving in different directions. And then it also made me think of the conversation between Lily and her father from one of the previous episodes, where he said a man can step into a river, but it's not the same man and it's not the same river. And we had a discussion in one of the previous breakdowns about, you know, that relates to multiple timelines, but it also relates to the fact that just people change over time.
Right.
So there's just a lot of associations with this. I can't believe we're literally 30 seconds into this episode.
I know. We've barely even, like, the actual content of the episode has not even started, and it's already like this. From arguably a very uncomfortable, weird, surrealist take on cavemen and time, we go to a very cute domestic scene between Lily and Jamie, which is, I think, as adorable as it is just extremely awkward. It's them waking up in bed together after they, you know, kind of hooked back up again, despite the fact that they probably shouldn't have. But Lily just wants it to be normal, which, I mean, normal by whose standards, Lily? I feel like that's a huge ask for the,
Yeah, I feel like that's her just trying to kind of dodge the last, you know, all the awkwardness. Like she dragged him into this situation, and, you know, we'll talk more about that later given what happens in this episode. But this is her kind of like, I think, wanting to just for a moment like not feel the guilt that she's probably been. I mean, like, we've talked many times about how she's reckless and she doesn't really consider the consequences of things. And that very much fits. It's a small thing, but it fits with that, right? Like, she's just like,
let it be normal.
Normal.
Yeah.
Jamie, for his part, is just as adorable and sweet and plays right along with it. And this very kind of playful, they pretend they have a cat and a dog, and it's all just very cute, which makes what happens in the end of the episode even more gut-wrenching.
Let's not talk about it until we have to.
Yeah.
Also adorable, kind of, is Katie and Forrest. Their affection for each other seems genuine, even in, like, slightly weird scenes. While Forrest is in the shower, Katie is seeing ghosts of Amaya and of Forrest's wife around the house. And in any other show, this would be, she's imagining the ghosts of what might have been, right? But in this show, we can assume that these are either scenes of the past or alternate presents and or futures that she's viewed through devs. So she doesn't have to imagine what life would be like in this house if these people were still around, because she's seen it.
It really reminded me of the scene where they put the cheese on the pedestal and like the virtual rat then interacts with the cheese, especially that moment where I think she like crosses through a hallway and you see the like ghost Amaya like run and grab one of the toys that's on the floor.
The toy on the ground. Yeah.
That was very much like the cheese moment for me. It was like, this might be a simulation, but it's still intersecting with the physical world in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, we also saw Forrest's wife's half of the conversation in the car, which confirmed what we were speculating about in a previous episode, where we didn't hear her side of the conversation, but she's literally saying, I don't want to talk about this right now. I don't like being on the phone while I'm driving. And we see that the reason she runs the stop sign is that she's looking in the rearview mirror at Amaya, at her daughter. Forrest is literally, playfully distracting her while she's driving deliberately, and that's, arguably the cause of that accident. And so, I empathize even more with Forrest now, and I fully understand. Previously when we were watching this, we were going, well, it's not really his fault, she's the one driving. But watching both sides of that conversation, you can really fully understand and empathize with why he blames himself for this. It also made me wonder, does Katie do this every morning? Like, does she sit around just imagining Amaya and Forrest's wife running around, or is it because it's this day of all days, like this, I think, most important of days?
Like, I just kind of free associated this, so maybe I'm totally incorrect, but you saying that made me immediately jump back to the line in the song at the beginning about having to open up a bruise so that you can see the blood, and the blood proves that it's real. Like, that feels like what Katie's doing here. Like, obviously, if you are romantically involved with a guy who went through this horrible tragedy and has, a dead daughter, a dead wife, like, the last thing you want to do is kind of remind yourself that you're the other woman in this scenario, that she's never gonna stand up to the things that have happened in Forrest's past, right? Like, she's never gonna be a replacement for either of the people in his life that he lost. But there's something ritualistic about reminding herself that those things happened and that they existed and that they were real, despite the fact that she can't really ever interact with them in the way that Forrest did back in the past. I don't know, like, I feel like that's a thematic thing. Like, I think that the idea that you have to kind of put pressure on the wound to make sure that it actually happened, I think is something that kind of weaves through a lot of this episode. The next moment is one of the most uncomfortable scenes, I think, of this episode for me, but it's the team, Stuart, and some of the unnamed devs employees looking at their work, and to do that, they've applied all of Lyndon's principles to it. They have a working machine, and they have gone back, I guess, to the formation of Earth, like we see.
A billion years.
Yeah, a billion years. Like, this is wild.
Stuart says later that they could go back to the formation of the solar system, but for now, he's saying, now in this scene, he's saying we can go back further, but this is 1 billion years ago. And the takeaway from the scene is like, it works. This is now a fully functioning, this is the end game of this machine that they've created. And it's kind of freaking Stuart out, I think, a lot.
It's freaking everyone out.
Why don't I feel good about it?
That would be your unconscious mind speaking to you. And what it's saying is, uh-oh.
Which I think is exactly, like, that's kind of what
Yeah.
my reaction to it was just like, oh no, this is bad. And to really drive that home, Stuart fast forwards the simulation to 1 second in the future, and it's terrifying. The present is no longer the present. The present is unfolding on the screen, and they're now the echo of this other reality that is existing in the machine that they built. Ugh.
You would think even in that moment somebody would want to like just not do what's on the screen. Like if the version of you on the screen is going, what the fuck, Stuart, then, you know, if it was me, I would go, yeah, Stuart, what the fuck? And then in doing so would change, like just slightly change it. But none of them appear to have the power to do that. They all hate it. It's so creepy. And it's like one of them going, you know, well, we're not in the box. And Stuart going, oh yeah. It's like everything is in the box, and within the box is another box that also has everything in it. And it's just like mirrors all the way down. And it just really hurts my brain to think about it. But I think it's like one of the most explicit representations we've had in the whole show of just how creepy and like reality breaking this technology is. So back at Forrest's house, Katie and Forrest are weirdly calm about this entire situation, where they know that this is the day that they've been looking forward to / dreading / planning for / not really planning for, because they already know that they can't change anything. But they're both so resigned. And I noticed this throughout the episode, especially the second time I watched it. Like, to me, this their whole demeanor for both of them during this entire episode really, to me, is like a statement on what happens to the human spirit when you remove the illusion of free will. Illusion, as they would say, you know, like arguably the illusion of free will. And they just both seem so defeated and resigned and almost like automatons. Like they're just going through the motions because they no longer believe that they have free will.
It really does at this point feel like they are just stuck in a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like they've watched this so much that they've memorized the script and are now just doing it because that's like it's become a circle, and that they can't escape what they already know to be true because they know it to be true because they watched it. And it's just it's a mess. It's turned them into like players on a stage, you know, that they learned all their lines and now they just can't deviate from them.
We both know this particular day inside and out.
Forwards and backwards.
In their dialogue, they're acknowledging that they're just saying lines that they've already watched themselves say many times. But it was always that from the first time they watched. So the first time they watched this day, the version they were watching was still them going, well, we've watched this many times. And so it's never changed. And the fact that they're going, you know, we know this day inside and out, forward and back, up to a point, is yet another example of like an otherwise sort of trivial or mundane phrase given, you know, a lot of weight and meaning just because of what this show is. Because we know what the point is. Like, up to a point is essentially like an idiom, but we know that the point that they're talking about is a literal point where they actually don't know the future, which is quickly approaching. And
so we get a really random bit of Pete just kind of dancing to a street performer, which I thought was very cute and really, you know, got me excited for Pete Watch 2020.
Pete Watch 2020 lives on.
The important part here is that we also get to see Lily and Jamie having a conversation about Lily's view on the people and devs, and kind of giving Jamie a breakdown of what she thinks is going on, and that they're living out kind of the tech nerds' wettest of wet dreams, that they think that they have everything kind of broke down into a computational pattern. She talks about how that they, you know, like they believe they have the encryption key, which is pointed coming from her, because if you remember
the encryption key to reality,
way back into episode 1 or whatever, when we learned that Lily works in encryption, so she knows what she's talking about when she's, you know, making encryption metaphors.
She explains it in a way that gets it across. I thought, you know, she was trying to explain it in a way that Jamie's like hardcore gamer brain could understand, you know, like she's like, okay, devs, they think they hit the level cap. Their KDs are fully cracked. Like they bought all the DLC, you know what I mean? I feel like he would have really got that. Lily and Jamie in their conversation come to the same conclusion that we were talking about last week, which is in order to foil foil the plan as they see it, although that's probably not how Katie and Forrest would describe it, because it's not a plan and it's not possible to foil it in their view. But all they would have to do to f up the program is just not go to devs, just hang out there. And so that is what they decide to do. But before we have to talk about that, let's talk about the dam scene. I just like white knuckled through this entire episode. This scene is literally Katie convincing Lyndon to jump off a fucking dam and kill himself. And Katie knows exactly what's going to happen.
Katie and Lyndon are functionally, they're on the same page. Like, they both agree that the thing that Lyndon did is correct. They both trust that the multiverse exists. There's no animosity. There's no disagreement happening here. It's just, they both have so much faith in this concept, but Katie's faith is in the fact that she's watched the scene play out and knows exactly what will happen, and therefore what she has, air quotes, has to do. And Lyndon's faith is in the idea that the multiverse will, I guess, always keep him safe. Because if, there are multiple realities, if he's meant to be alive in a moment, he won't be able to die, right? Like, there will always be...
I feel like we could dissect every line of this conversation.
Oh,
like,
yes.
Every single line of dialogue in this scene is... some veiled reference to the fact that Katie already knows what's going to happen, but can also be interpreted multiple ways, where she's saying, that's not how this is going to play out. That could just be a normal thing. Like, this is not going to play out the way that you want it to be. It's something that somebody might say, whether or not they had literally seen the future. Right. And yet when Katie says it, it has way more impact because she literally knows that that's not how it's going to play out. And I thought the moment where Lyndon realizes that he is going to climb over the rail and do what she says is where he kind of fully cracks. Like, he's just going, oh my God, it's a perfect circle. It's perfect. I love it. And she's going, yeah, I know you do. That's why you're going to do this. What Lyndon doesn't understand is that there is no version, apparently, where he lives. It made me really question, like, if there are infinite branches where everything has happened, shouldn't there be versions where Lyndon does live? Are we just not seeing those versions? Or is this truly like a fixed point in the timeline where Lyndon falls every single time? And why would that be the case?
It's interesting to me too, because it depends on how you look at it versus, like, is Katie just murdering him, or is Katie actually adhering to a fixed point in time? Because it certainly feels, at least to me, it feels like Katie is just straight up murdering him. Like, I
definitely thought she was just gonna push him.
I did too. There's a moment there where it kind of feels like she wants to. She literally just casually walks away. Even this recontextualizes everything that we saw about Katie and Forrest's morning, too. Like, they have this very casual, like, oh, Lyndon's in your car, go deal with that.
Oh, but, yeah,
just the entire time.
Gotta go pick up the laundry. Got some chores to do. Gotta just
exactly
deal with that. Like, it's so casual. They just don't. They're so far past the point of caring, and they've lost so much of their humanity. As Forrest approaches devs, we're getting this voiceover of Stewart reading this poem, which is Al Bad by Philip Larkin. And this poem f***ed with me as much as anything in this episode did. It's a poem about death. And it's a poem about being devastated by your own mortality, which is something that happens to me pretty much daily. This is also an episode in which multiple characters die. One of the lines that stuck out from Stuart reading this is,
most things will never happen. This one will.
It's an odd thing to highlight in a show about infinite branching timelines, because by definition, in that worldview, most things will happen. In fact, everything will happen. That's the point, is that it's monkeys on a typewriter who will eventually come up with Shakespeare. It's, given infinite time, infinite branches, infinite permutations on a quantum level, whatever, everything will eventually happen. And Stewart through this poem is saying, no, that's not entirely true. We've applied the Everett theory, we applied Lyndon's math and Lyndon's work to this, and it makes the machine work. But I think Stewart still is not truly a firm believer. And I think if Forrest would stop to listen to the actual words, he would probably agree. And this also relates back to the previous scene. No matter how many different versions of it we see, nothing else happens except this one thing happens every time.
I think I had a little bit of a different interpretation of it. I mean, not wholly. Like, I completely agree with you on, like, the eeriness of it. But I also think, like, the name Obad, like, the word Obad actually means, it's a special poem for, like, a dawn or a morning or a love poem. And I think that the crux of this, the whole poem is not necessarily strictly speaking about death. It's more about inevitability and, like, the things that you cannot run from. And so the line that I really liked, I really like the most things will never happen, this one will, but I also like, there's a line that says, this is a special way of being afraid, because the poem talks about how people like to think of fear as something that you can kind of overcome, or that if you just ignore it enough that you will eventually become unafraid. But when you're dealing with something that's literally inevitable, you can't overcome that. You can't do anything to change that. And I think that's, in the context of this poem, in the context of this moment, I think that it's, most things will never happen because you're gonna die before you see them. Like, you can't experience all of these things. But the things that are going to happen in your life are definitely going to happen. Like, you can't avoid them.
God damn, Meg, why would you say that to me?
I'm sorry. Stewart is so fascinating in this scene. He's kind of gone from being the, like, crotchety old man who you kind of want to do, like, the okay boomer to him because he's, telling Lyndon to shut up and not have opinions. And now he's actually, like, he's flipping that around on Forrest because, Forrest doesn't know what this poem is from. Like, he has no interest in it. And Stewart is just kind of...
He doesn't care.
Right. He's begging him to just guess. And we know, just knowing what we know about Forrest, we know that Forrest has literally no interest in guessing because he knows already that guesses don't matter. That guesses are functionally not real because it doesn't have any effect on anything that's going to happen. So, of course, Forrest won't guess. But then, Stewart says, such a big decision being made about our future by someone who knows so little about our past. And I think that he's right. He's completely right that Forrest is so myopic in his viewpoint that he has no idea of, like, the greater context of what's happening here. And, like,
he also refers to his obsessive restriction.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
On how they use this technology. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also Forrest has watched this day play out. Mm-hmm. He's seen this conversation, so he could have Googled it if he wanted to.
Mm-hmm, but
although I guess he wouldn't Google it, he would do an Amaya search. At this point in the conversation, also, when Stewart is telling Forrest that the system now works because everybody ignored him and his stupid restrictive obsession, they applied Lyndon's math, and Lyndon was right. They all know it. At this point, Lyndon is hurtling off a dam to his death, and Forrest knows this and nevertheless seems utterly unmoved, which I think, as humanizing as some of these episodes have been to Forrest, I thought this was extremely dehumanizing, which seemed to be a theme of this episode. Again, like the removal of free will and the dehumanization that causes. I thought, okay, the question that Stewart asks,
who was Mark Antony,
stumped me, basically. But I know that you have a lot to say, Meg, about who was Mark Antony.
The top layer of this is that Mark Antony was a historical figure. He was a Roman ruler who came after Julius Caesar. He's also a character in multiple Shakespeare plays. So he married Octavia, who was one of his, like, cohorts, sisters or whatever, kind of consolidate power, but then had an affair with Cleopatra, and that affair is sort of responsible for one of Rome's big wars and downfalls. Anyway, the Shakespeare play, Antony and Cleopatra, not necessarily the exact historical context of this entire mess, really pits the idea that these characters are manipulated more by the fact that Fortune, with a capital F, like the character, like the god of fortune, is
the natural
playing
force
with them. Right, exactly. Like, they are not players in the game that they think they are playing. They are pieces. And the idea that they cannot escape the whims of fortune is a huge component of this story. And so the story ends sadly. It's, Anthony sacrifices everything, fights his, cohort in the second triumvirate, Octavian. He's defeated. They
Spoilers.
wind up back together. Sorry. Historical spoilers. Octavian wins. Cleopatra, in the Shakespeare version, tries to stage a suicide to, kind of emotionally manipulate Antony back into her arms. It doesn't work. It's a Romeo and Juliet scenario
Shakespeare
where
loves
Antony then thinks
fake
that she's
suicides.
dead. Loves it. Loves
Favorite
fake
thing.
suicides. Anyway,
How
all of
is
this
this
culminates into them both dying. And so the idea here, in the context of devs, and it doesn't necessarily matter if you put Katie in the Cleopatra spot or if you put the devs unit in, specifically, just like as a concept in the Cleopatra spot of this metaphor, but you have Forrest as Mark Antony sacrificing everything he knows, despite what he knows to be better or true or, better for the common good, because he is obsessed with this singular idea of, whether it's the devs unit, whether it's Katie's approval, whether it's his daughter. He's venturing down this path that from the outside looking in, we can say is, terrible and horrible and he should just change it. But in the context of the Shakespeare play, he literally can't, because he is just a player in this game.
He has no free will.
Forrest is, in Stuart's mind, literally just walking the same steps that Mark Antony...
He's literally repeating the past.
He's doing the exact same thing that men in power before him have done and failed and, paid for it with their lives. But Forrest has no concept of that. So he is just doing it anyway, and he doesn't even know... He probably has no idea about any of this context around, this character that Stuart is referring to, and he doesn't care. And then later, we see that Katie also has no idea. Like, Katie has a throwaway joke about how, Stuart was quoting Shakespeare, which he wasn't, but kind of is, it's...
Right, he was quoting Philip Larkin.
Right, but they are in a Shakespearean scenario themselves, and they have no idea.
Well, Meg.
Yep.
We're here.
We made it.
This was so hard to watch. Let's start with a note of levity, though, and kick off the final Pete Watch 2020. Woo, woo.
Yeah.
Let's get some like sirens or flashing lights or something going here because maybe like some confetti coming down the screen because Pete Watch paid off, man. We were right about Pete.
Oh my god.
So
this is the exact opposite of Lube Man. This is this is literally the antithesis of Lube Man. Everything paid off.
Watchmen.
We were right from the get-go. Pete is a pivotal character and is not what he seems.
We have to give a shout out to Nisa Johnson in our YouTube comments, who just last week guessed that Pete was a CIA operative, which is
extremely close.
Not true, but
very, very close.
Yeah, pretty close.
Yeah.
And definitely not what I had guessed. So,
yeah, no, me neither.
Great job, Nisa. There's this shot of Pete just outside on a blanket, and Kenton walks by. He's far in the background, and that was the first moment where I was like, oh, In the previous episode, he was spying on Forrest and Jamie and Lily and Katie and going, oh, okay, you're all friends now, huh?
Mm-hmm.
And previous to that, he had said, I'm going to look out for my own interests in this. So given everything that Kenton has done, killing people, intimidating people, falsifying police reports, colluding with the psychiatrist. He needs to nip this in the. He needs to get rid of Jamie and Lily before this goes any further. I'm dancing around it because I don't want to talk about Jamie getting f***ing murdered.
What's ostensibly set up is like a very cute domestic scene between...
He's like cutting the lemon for her water right before.
Right. It's just
like,
very
you're the
sweet
best.
and very cute. But of course, Kenton, he hears the door kind of jingle, and like I think he knows in that moment that something is very, very wrong. That, someone is there and this is bad. But he doesn't have time to act or do anything because Kenton shoots him right there.
The way that this scene is sort of choreographed and edited and plays out is that we don't know where Lily is during this, but she is so quick to react. She I think the way I interpreted it was knowing that Kenton would go up to the window, assuming that she escaped through the window. She, hid in the closet. Like she either the window was already open or she very quickly set that up, hid in the closet next to it, bashed him in the face with a lamp. I was like, good thing you're so fucking reckless.
Yeah.
Like this paid off. Of course, Kenton, who's like a real tough guy, overpowers her, and she's facing her own death before Pete, the third secret Russian operative we've met over the course of this show, comes in and thankfully saves her. But boy, oh boy, this whole thing was just tough to see.
It was really, it's shot and scored exactly like Sergei's death, right? Like, he doesn't have a plastic bag this time, but he's strangling the life out of her, and he's, it's the same soundtrack, it's the same posture, it's everything about Sergei's murder is being recreated in Lily until Pete intervenes, in which case, he kills Kenton, garrots him.
The tables have turned.
Yeah, and then kind of lays it all out for Lily about, like, what's about to happen, and that he was sent there to watch and protect Sergei, and then when Sergei was taken off the table, he was given new orders to just watch Lily. He wasn't supposed to protect her, he wasn't supposed to intervene, he was just supposed to keep an eye on her, but he, in his mind, made a choice, which, is debatable whether or not that choice is actually real, knowing what you know about the rest of the show.
That was not an order. That was a choice.
It's very interesting how much emphasis Pete's whole speech has on the idea of choice, because it's, especially knowing Lily right now in this moment, it's never been more clear to her probably that, that she has no control over this. Like, this is antithetical to everything that she knows now. It's culminating because in her head, just it was as simple as not leaving the apartment for a day.
It's a failure of imagination, because the thing that she couldn't foresee, and I wish that they had thought harder about this, lock the door. Maybe don't go back to Lily's apartment when you've broken out of a mental hospital after being arrested. Like, you're fugitives. And just because you had a conversation with Forrest and Katie, even assuming, as I'm sure they did, that Kenton was Forrest's lapdog and Forrest would have him on a leash at this point, Kenton is off the leash. They have no way of knowing that, but still, there's like more potential sources of danger or reprisal or retribution, and they never foresaw this. Lily, it never occurred to her that another catastrophic thing might happen, and that would push her toward Devs with a gun. That moment when she's saying goodbye to Jamie and like really just kind of tenderly touching him, like I literally like almost like teared up.
Yeah, it's
that
hard.
doesn't happen.
It's really hard to watch.
I'm a pretty tough guy. I'm a tough guy like Kenton, so like that doesn't happen to me a lot, but like that was just such like it was such a human, tragic, horrible moment. And it's sort of I've been talking a lot, I'm sorry, but this is the last thing I'll say. In the scene when Lily is walking toward Devs and she's framed underneath the halo, which is where we saw Forrest in the first episode, it really cemented the comparison between Lily and Forrest, who now have one other thing in common, which is they feel responsible for the death of a loved one.
Absolutely.
Because Lily dragged Jamie into this whole scenario very much against his will. He is 100% dead because of her.
The next moment here, after Lily is haloed, is a security guy kind of looking at Lily walking through the forest. In my head, I kind of got the feeling that this was just a scene added to preserve the logic of the Devs security. Like, we know that Devs is like so top secret, and then we know that like no one is like allowed in that isn't cleared, etc. And like Lily has no clearance, so of course there has to be someone watching it, right? Or else there would yeah, like
it made me laugh because like this whole section could feel very dreamlike of her finally kind of going here after everything that's happened, finally walking up to like the gates of heaven or hell or whatever. There's a lot of symbolism, etc., but then there's just like an aside where like some random Kenton's dead, so like some random security guard is like, hey, should we let this, no, the boss says let her, okay. And it's like, yeah, it felt like all right, it felt like something that was added specifically so that like pedantic nincompoops like you and me couldn't go, well, how did she just walk up to the super secure facility? Like,
Yeah.
What's your name?
Lily.
Stuart still being there really made him seem like a larger than life figure. Like his whole demeanor here of just guarding the gates to Devs, more than cumulatively with all the previous scenes, really just made me think of Charon, the figure from Greek mythology. He's like the ferryman who escorts the souls of dead people across the river Styx and into the underworld, which is effectively what he literally is doing with Lily. Like he does warn her, like, you should not go in here. This is not a good place. And there's a moment where they both sort of acknowledge the inevitability without saying the words tramline. But it relates back to the poem about death and the inevitability of death. And so if entering if entering Devs is equivalent to, or the comparison is drawn between entering Devs and dying, because we literally know that Lily is going to die in there, then yeah, that makes Stuart Charon, and he literally presses the button for the electromagnetic platform, so he's literally ferrying her across. So I just thought that was a moment of cool, like, fairly explicit symbolism.
It was interesting too, because we both work on the outlines for these breakdowns kind of independently, and we both individually came up with, like, wow, Stuart feels mythological here. Like, this feels...
Yeah, we both wrote that down separately.
Yeah, which is, I think that really emphasizes how well the show is doing at, like, the subtext and symbolism, that even though, like, I didn't necessarily make the Charon jump until you said something to me, but, like, the fact that this scene just evokes that sort of, like, almost reminded me of the gate in the Neverending Story that you could, like, walk through, but it would, like, blast you. Like, that's what I was thinking. I was like, oh my god. Like, which, I mean, I don't know. I just think it's so interesting and so cool, but the last moment here is Lily asking what's inside, and Stuart answering very honestly that everything is inside.
Yeah, it's the box. It's the machine is the box with everything inside, and there's another box inside the box with everything inside. But also the Devs building is literally shaped like a box.
Exactly. With
everything inside. So there's like 100 layers of literal and metaphorical and all these different meanings. The actual last shot of the episode is Lily walking inside, which I was like moving the mouse to be like, how much time is left in this episode? And it was only the credits. I was like, no!
One more episode.
Oh,
we have
man.
One more episode.
We're going to be back next week to talk about the final episode of Devs and wrap up the season as a whole. I'm both terrified and extremely excited. I need to know what's going to happen. Do you think Lily is going to die in there? Or is she going to change the timeline?
I mean, I think both are equally bad at this point, right? Like, there's going to be some horrible event that happens. So whatever it is.
Yeah. Is there any version of this with, like, a happy ending?
Right.
Until then, thanks for watching. Hit us up on Twitter. As always, I'm Rogue Cheddar. Meg is Rusty Polished. Leave us a comment below, and we will see you next week.